What happens when one carefully phrased question on live television stops feeling like an interview and starts sounding like a challenge? What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars decides that staying silent is no longer an option, turning an ordinary morning on The View into a conversation that nobody in the studio, and millions watching at home, will ever forget? Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to Prime Spotlight, like this video, and comment below with your thoughts. The cameras glided across the familiar stage as the audience welcomed another episode with warm applause. Bright lights reflected from the polished floor while the hosts exchanged relaxed smiles, setting the tone for what appeared to be another engaging celebrity interview. Nothing about the atmosphere suggested that the next hour would become the subject of endless debate. Backstage, Margot Robbie took one final breath before walking toward the entrance. She had spent years navigating premieres, award ceremonies, and hundreds of interviews. She understood how television worked. She understood difficult questions. She even understood uncomfortable conversations. But there was something different about this morning. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps it was simply experience. She smiled politely as the stage manager counted down. 5. The audience clapped louder. 4. The music swelled. 3. Margot adjusted her jacket. 2. She nodded. And we're live. The crowd erupted as she stepped onto the stage. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed her warmly before introducing the rest of the panel. Joy Behar smiled. Sarah Haynes leaned forward with genuine curiosity. Sunny Hostin offered a courteous smile as well. At least that was how it looked. Margot greeted everyone with confidence, hugging the hosts before taking her seat. The interview began exactly as everyone expected. They discussed her latest project. They laughed about filming challenges. Margot shared stories from behind the scenes that had the audience laughing. Everything flowed naturally. Even Sunny contributed thoughtful questions about preparation and storytelling. For nearly 15 minutes, the conversation remained relaxed. Viewers watching at home had no reason to think anything unusual would happen. Then Sunny glanced down at her notes. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. She crossed one page with another, looked back at Margot, then smiled. I've been thinking about something, Sunny said carefully. The audience quieted. Margot nodded. Sunny continued. You've often played women who appear incredibly confident. Strong. Independent. But confidence can sometimes be misunderstood. Some critics argue that celebrities unintentionally influence unrealistic expectations. Do you ever wonder whether public admiration comes with responsibilities people don't always discuss? The question wasn't aggressive. Not yet. Margot smiled politely. I think everyone has responsibilities, she answered calmly. Actors tell stories. Audiences interpret those stories differently. Sunny nodded. But don't actors also shape culture? I believe stories shape conversations, Margot replied. People shape culture. The audience murmured softly. Sunny didn't move on. Instead, she leaned forward. What happens when those conversations create pressures for ordinary people? Margot paused. Not because she lacked an answer. Because she sensed where the discussion was heading. She folded her hands together. I think expectations exist everywhere, she answered. Social media, advertising, films, television. We're all contributing to conversations whether we intend to or not. Sunny smiled. So would you say Hollywood shares equal responsibility? Margot answered carefully. I'd say responsibility belongs to everyone participating in public conversations. Joy noticed the subtle shift. She glanced toward Sunny before looking back at Margot. The audience had stopped laughing. Every sentence now carried more weight than the previous one. Sunny wasn't finished. Sometimes, she continued, people believe celebrities avoid accountability by saying they're just entertainers. Margot maintained eye contact. I've never said that. No, Sunny acknowledged. But some people might hear your answer that way. Silence. It lasted only a second. But inside a television studio, 1 second can feel like an eternity. Margot's smile faded, not dramatically, but naturally. She remained composed. I appreciate thoughtful criticism, she said. But I also think it's important not to place every societal expectation on artists. Sunny nodded again. But isn't that exactly what influence means? Margot answered almost immediately. Influence isn't control. The audience reacted with quiet applause. Sunny noticed. So where's the line? Margot didn't hesitate. The line is remembering that audiences are intelligent. They don't simply absorb everything they see without thinking. A few audience members clapped louder. Whoopi shifted slightly in her chair. She sensed the energy changing. Sarah smiled politely, attempting to soften the atmosphere. I think that's an interesting distinction, she offered. Sunny looked toward Sarah briefly. Then back to Margot. But surely you understand why people ask these questions. I do. And you're comfortable answering them? Absolutely. Sunny smiled again. This time it looked different. Less conversational. More determined. I'd like to ask something more direct. The audience became completely silent. Margot nodded once. Go ahead. Sunny took a slow breath. You've become one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces. Every appearance becomes a headline. Every fashion choice becomes a trend. Every interview spreads across social media. Doesn't that level of visibility require accepting criticism whenever people believe those choices send the wrong message? Margot listened without interrupting. When Sunny finished, she waited another second. Then answered. I don't mind criticism. Another pause. I mind assumptions. Sunny tilted her head. What assumptions? Margot's voice remained calm. The assumption that public visibility automatically means public ownership. The audience reacted immediately. Several people applauded. Others simply watched. Sunny folded her hands together. Can you explain? Margot nodded. There's a difference between discussing someone's work and assuming you know their intentions. Joy looked intrigued. Whoopi remained quiet. Sarah leaned forward. Margot continued. If someone dislikes a performance, that's fair. If someone questions an idea, that's healthy. But when conversations become about assigning motives to people you've never met, she paused. That's where dialogue becomes something else. The audience applauded more confidently. Sunny didn't interrupt. Instead, she asked softly, So you're saying critics go too far? Margot smiled faintly. I'm saying everyone, including celebrities, journalists, commentators, and audiences, benefits when curiosity comes before conclusions. Another wave of applause. Whoopi finally spoke. That's an interesting way to frame it. Sunny looked thoughtful. But there was still one question left on her notes. One question she had clearly saved. She glanced down. Then back up. Her expression settled. This may be uncomfortable, she admitted. Margot answered with surprising confidence. The important conversations usually are. The audience collectively leaned forward. Even the camera operators seemed unusually still. Sunny slowly closed her notebook. I think it's time we talk about perception versus reality. And in that instant, everyone in the studio sensed that the conversation was no longer just another celebrity interview. It was becoming something far bigger. The silence that followed Sunny Hostin's final sentence seemed to settle over the studio like a heavy curtain. Even the audience, who had been quick to applaud moments earlier, now waited without making a sound. The bright lights still illuminated the set, but the mood had shifted completely. This no longer felt like a routine promotional interview. It felt like the beginning of a conversation that neither side intended to leave unfinished. Margot Robbie kept her posture relaxed, but years of live television experience had taught her something valuable. Sometimes the most powerful response wasn't the quickest one. She let Sunny's words hang in the air for another moment before answering. Perception and reality rarely look the same, Margot said evenly. Especially when millions of people only see carefully selected moments. Sunny nodded slowly. But don't those moments matter? They do. And people form opinions from them. They always will. Sunny leaned slightly closer. So isn't it fair to question the image that celebrities present? Margot smiled politely. It's fair to ask questions. She paused. It's less fair to assume you already know the answers. Several audience members clapped softly. Sunny acknowledged the applause with a brief glance before continuing. I'm not talking about assumptions. I'm talking about accountability. Margot answered without hesitation. Accountability is important. But accountability works both ways. Sunny's eyebrows lifted slightly. What do you mean? Margot folded her hands together. When someone with a public platform asks questions, those questions influence people too. Sunny didn't respond immediately. Margot continued. Interviews shape public opinion. News headlines shape public opinion. Television discussions shape public opinion. So if we're talking about influence, she offered a calm smile. Then everyone sitting at this table shares it. The audience erupted into louder applause. Joy Behar looked from Margot to Sunny before quietly laughing. That's hard to argue with. Whoopi gave a small nod but remained silent, clearly interested in seeing where the conversation would go. Sunny waited for the applause to fade. I'm glad you mentioned influence, she replied. Because many people believe celebrities enjoy influence without wanting responsibility. Margot nodded. I understand why people think that. And I simply don't agree that the conversation is that simple. Sunny crossed one leg over the other. Help us understand. Margot looked around the table before speaking. When audiences watch a film, they see 2 hours. When they read an interview, they see 10 minutes. When they scroll social media, she gestured gently with one hand. They see 10 seconds. A quiet murmur spread through the audience. But real people don't exist in 10-second clips. Sarah Haynes smiled. That's true for almost everyone these days. Margot nodded appreciatively. Exactly. Sunny wasn't ready to move on. But those clips are often created by celebrities themselves. Margot answered calmly. Sometimes. And sometimes they're edited by someone else. And sometimes they're taken completely out of context. The audience applauded again. Sunny remained composed. But surely you recognize why people become skeptical. Margot smiled. I do. What concerns me is when skepticism becomes certainty. The room grew quiet again. Sunny picked up one of her note cards. I've read interviews where people say Hollywood carefully manages every public appearance. Margot laughed softly. If Hollywood could control everything. She glanced around the audience. None of us would ever have uncomfortable interviews. The audience burst into laughter. Even Joy couldn't hide a grin. Whoopi smiled. Sunny herself laughed briefly before regaining her composure. Fair enough. Margot laughed too. For what it's worth, she continued. I've always believed uncomfortable conversations are healthy. Sunny looked genuinely interested. Even this one? Especially this one. That answer drew another round of applause. For the first time since the discussion had shifted, the tension eased ever so slightly. But only for a moment. Sunny looked directly at Margot. Then let me ask something people might genuinely wonder. Margot nodded. Go ahead. When criticism becomes overwhelming. Sunny asked carefully. Do celebrities start believing they're above answering difficult questions? Margot's expression remained thoughtful. No. So why do some interviews end with celebrities refusing to answer? Margot considered her words. Because answering every question doesn't necessarily create understanding. Sunny leaned forward. What creates understanding? Listening. The audience applauded again. Margot continued. Real listening. Not listening just long enough to prepare another question. The applause became louder. Sunny noticed the reaction. So you're suggesting interviewers sometimes listen to respond instead of listening to understand? Margot smiled. I'm suggesting everyone does that. Joy nodded. I think that's probably true. Whoopi finally spoke again. It's easy to forget conversations aren't debates. Margot looked toward Whoopi. They shouldn't be. Sunny rested her notebook on her lap. But debates aren't always bad. No. They help people challenge ideas. They absolutely do. Sunny smiled. So what idea would you challenge today? The audience leaned in again. Margot answered quietly. I'd challenge the idea that disagreement has to become conflict. Sunny seemed surprised. What do you mean? Margot looked across the audience. People have forgotten that two intelligent people can disagree. She looked back toward Sunny. Without treating each other like enemies. The applause lasted several seconds. Several audience members even stood briefly before sitting back down. Sunny allowed the applause to finish. I appreciate that answer. Margot nodded. But, Sunny smiled. I still think you've avoided one important question. Margot laughed softly. I had a feeling you might say that. The audience laughed with her. Sunny flipped one final card onto the table. This one's personal. The laughter stopped immediately. Margot's smile faded slightly. I'm listening. Sunny took a careful breath. Have you ever walked into an interview already expecting to be misunderstood? Margot didn't answer right away. She looked toward the audience, then toward the hosts, finally back at Sunny. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than before. Yes. The honesty in that single word changed the room. No applause. No laughter. Just silence. Sunny nodded slowly. What does that feel like? Margot looked down briefly before meeting Sunny's eyes once more. It feels like hoping people are interested in hearing who you are. She paused. Instead of proving who they already believe you to be. The audience remained completely still. Even the cameras seemed to move more slowly. Sunny lowered her note cards. For the first time all morning, there wasn't another question waiting. Instead, there was reflection. But across the studio, producers exchanged nervous glances through their headsets. They could sense that this conversation was resonating far beyond the audience in front of them. Social media was already reacting in real time, and the discussion was about to take another unexpected turn, one that neither Margot nor Sunny could have anticipated. The control room buzzed with quiet urgency as producers watched comments and reactions stream across their monitors. Every minute that passed seemed to generate thousands of new posts. Viewers were debating every exchange, replaying every pause, and analyzing every expression. Yet inside the studio, none of that noise could be heard. There was only the conversation unfolding beneath the bright lights, and the growing realization that something unusually honest was taking place. Sunny Hostin glanced toward the producers for only a second before returning her attention to Margot Robbie. "Can I ask one more difficult question?" Margot smiled faintly. "I think we've come too far to stop now." A ripple of laughter eased the tension, but it disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Sunny nodded. "Earlier you said people often assume they know your intentions." "I did. So let me ask without assuming." Margot leaned forward slightly. "I'm listening." Sunny chose her words carefully. "Do you think fame changes the way people speak to you?" Margot didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around the table, taking in each of the hosts before speaking. "I think fame changes the way people imagine they know you." The audience responded with thoughtful applause. Sunny tilted her head. "There's a difference? A very big one." Margot's voice remained calm. "When someone recognizes you from your work, that's one thing. When someone believes they know your character because of headlines." She paused. "That's something entirely different." Joy Behar folded her arms thoughtfully. "That happens a lot." Margot nodded. "It happens to actors." She looked toward the hosts. "It happens to journalists." She smiled gently. "It probably happens to everyone sitting at this table." For a moment, nobody spoke. Even Sunny seemed to consider that observation before responding. "That's fair." Margot continued. "The danger is that we begin responding to people's assumptions instead of their actual words." The audience applauded again. Sarah Haynes finally joined the discussion. "That sounds exhausting." Margot laughed softly. "Sometimes it is. But it's also part of the job." Sunny leaned back. "So you've accepted it?" "I've accepted that I can't control every opinion." She paused. "But I can control how I respond." Sunny nodded slowly. "And today you chose to respond." "I did." "Why?" Margot smiled. "Because conversations like this matter." The audience watched in complete silence. Margot continued. "If people only speak when everything feels comfortable." She looked around the studio. "Then nobody ever grows." That sentence lingered in the room. Whoopi Goldberg, who had spent much of the interview quietly observing, finally leaned forward. "I've been listening very carefully." Everyone turned toward her. She looked first at Sunny, then at Margot. "I think both of you are talking about responsibility." Sunny nodded. Margot did the same. "But you're defining it differently." Margot answered respectfully. "I think that's true." Whoopi smiled. "So maybe the disagreement isn't as big as it feels." Sunny looked thoughtful. "Perhaps." Margot agreed. "Perhaps." For the first time since the conversation had become serious, the atmosphere softened. Then Joy spoke. "But television has a funny way of making small disagreements look enormous." The audience laughed knowingly. Margot smiled. "That's true." Sunny smiled as well. "So does social media." More laughter followed. For a brief moment, the discussion felt lighter. Then Sunny looked back at Margot. "I want to ask something I've never asked another guest." Margot raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." Sunny folded her hands. "What would you ask us?" The audience immediately reacted with surprised applause. Even Joy looked intrigued. Margot laughed quietly. "That's turning the interview around." Sunny smiled. "Maybe." Margot considered the question. "I suppose I'd ask." She paused long enough for the room to become completely still. "Whether public conversations are becoming more interested in winning than understanding." Nobody interrupted. Sunny answered first. "Sometimes." Joy nodded. "Probably." Sarah added quietly. "I hope not." Whoopi looked toward the audience before speaking. "I think audiences deserve honesty." Margot nodded. "So do guests." Another wave of applause echoed across the studio. Sunny smiled. "I don't disagree with that." Margot looked directly at her. "I didn't think you would." Their exchange drew appreciative laughter. The tension that had defined much of the interview seemed to dissolve. until a member of the audience unexpectedly raised a hand. Whoopi noticed. "We don't usually do this during interviews." She smiled. "But I think we'll make an exception." A microphone was handed to the audience member. She stood, clearly nervous. "My question is for both of you." Sunny and Margot nodded. She took a deep breath. Watching this conversation, she hesitated. "It feels like you're disagreeing, but you're also listening." She looked around the studio. "Why doesn't that happen more often?" Silence filled the room. Sunny answered first. "Because listening takes patience." Margot continued. "And patience doesn't always fit into television." The audience laughed softly. Sunny added, "It also doesn't always fit into headlines." Margot smiled. "Or online comments." The audience applauded once more. The woman sat down, and the applause continued for several seconds. In the control room, producers exchanged relieved smiles. The interview had taken an unexpected direction, but instead of becoming chaotic, it had become deeply engaging. Still, one producer pointed toward another monitor. Trending topics. Clips from the interview were already spreading online. Some praised Sunny for asking difficult questions. Others praised Margot for remaining composed under pressure. Many viewers argued that the discussion represented something increasingly rare, a disagreement without shouting. Back on stage, Sunny glanced toward the large studio clock. "We're almost out of time." Margot smiled. "Time moves quickly when the conversation is real." Sunny laughed. "It certainly does." Whoopi looked into the camera. "We have just enough time for one final thought." Sunny turned toward Margot one last time. "If viewers remember only one thing from today," she asked quietly, "what do you hope it is?" Margot took a slow breath. Her answer came without hesitation. "I hope they remember that asking difficult questions isn't the problem." She looked directly at Sunny. "The real challenge is having the courage to truly hear the answer." The audience rose to its feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. Some applauded enthusiastically. Others simply nodded in quiet appreciation. The cameras captured every reaction as the applause echoed throughout the studio. But outside those walls, the conversation was only beginning. Within minutes, clips from the interview would dominate social media feeds, news segments, and opinion panels. Every pause, every answer, and every expression would be replayed and debated by millions, setting the stage for an aftermath far bigger than anyone in the studio could have imagined. The applause continued long after the cameras would normally have faded to a commercial break. Members of the audience remained on their feet, some clapping enthusiastically, others simply looking at one another as if they had witnessed something they hadn't expected when they walked into the studio that morning. It wasn't because anyone had won the conversation. It was because the interview had unfolded in a way that felt increasingly rare. Firm disagreement without raised voices, difficult questions answered without hostility, and two public figures refusing to reduce each other to headlines. As the show's closing music began to play, the hosts exchanged quick smiles. Crew members moved carefully around the stage, preparing for the transition off the air, but the discussion was far from over. Sunny Hostin extended her hand across the table. "Thank you for staying with the conversation." Margot smiled warmly and shook it. "Thank you for asking questions that mattered." The audience applauded again. Whoopi Goldberg stood and addressed everyone in the studio. "I think conversations like this remind us that disagreement doesn't have to become disrespect." The audience responded with another round of applause. Joy Behar chuckled. "I'll admit, I wasn't entirely sure where this interview was headed." Margot laughed. "Neither was I." The laughter spread through the room, easing whatever tension remained. Sarah Haynes looked toward Margot. "You stayed remarkably calm." Margot smiled. "I've learned that staying calm doesn't mean avoiding difficult moments. It means deciding how you want to meet them." Several audience members nodded in agreement. The red studio lights switched off. The broadcast had officially ended. But inside the studio, the conversations continued. Audience members gathered near the stage, discussing the interview with surprising passion. Some believed Sunny had asked the questions many viewers had wanted to hear. Others admired Margot's patience and thoughtful responses. No two conversations sounded exactly alike. And perhaps that was the point. Backstage, producers watched analytics climb almost by the second. One assistant refreshed the social media dashboard. Another looked at streaming numbers. A producer shook his head in disbelief. "I've never seen engagement move this quickly." Within minutes, short clips from the interview began circulating online. One clip featured Sunny asking, Does fame change the way people speak to you? Another focused on Margot's response. Influence isn't control. A third highlighted the moment when Margot quietly said, "The real challenge is having the courage to truly hear the answer." Each clip attracted thousands of comments within minutes. Some viewers praised Sunny for refusing to avoid uncomfortable topics. Others applauded Margot for remaining composed throughout the discussion. Many simply appreciated seeing a conversation where nobody resorted to shouting. Entertainment commentators quickly joined the discussion. One television analyst described the interview as an example of thoughtful disagreement. Another argued that audiences had become hungry for conversations built on listening instead of confrontation. Across social media, reactions poured in from every direction. One viewer wrote, "I expected another celebrity interview. I didn't expect a real conversation." Another commented, "This proves people can disagree without insulting each other." Others debated individual questions and answers, replaying short clips repeatedly while offering their own interpretations. Some believed Sunny had challenged important ideas. Others believed Margot had successfully defended her perspective. Neither side seemed interested in declaring a clear winner. Instead, they discussed the ideas themselves. By evening, countless reaction videos had appeared online. Television programs referenced the interview. Podcasts devoted entire episodes to analyzing its most memorable moments. Opinion writers debated whether modern interviews had become too focused on creating viral moments rather than genuine understanding. Ironically, the interview itself had become one of the most viral moments of the week. The following morning, newspaper entertainment columns featured photographs from the broadcast. Not dramatic photographs, not angry expressions, but images capturing quiet eye contact across the table. One headline emphasized the respectful tone of the exchange. Another highlighted the audience's standing ovation. A third described the conversation as proof that strong opinions and mutual respect could exist at the same time. Meanwhile, Margot arrived at another event later that week. Reporters immediately surrounded her. Instead of asking about her newest project, nearly every question focused on the interview. One journalist asked, "Looking back, would you answer anything differently?" Margot smiled. "No." The reporter seemed surprised. "Not even one response?" She shook her head gently. "No, because conversations aren't valuable when everyone agrees. They're valuable when everyone feels heard." Those words spread across entertainment websites within hours. Elsewhere, Sunny Hostin was asked about the interview during another television appearance. The interviewer smiled. "Would you invite Margot Robbie back?" Sunny laughed. "Absolutely." "Why?" "Because the best guests don't just answer questions. They make everyone in the room think." That answer generated another wave of discussion online. Days later, audience members who had attended the recording shared their own experiences. Many described the atmosphere inside the studio as surprisingly calm despite the intensity of the discussion. One audience member recalled, "You could actually hear people listening." Another wrote, "There were moments when nobody wanted to interrupt because every sentence mattered." As the week came to a close, the interview remained one of the most talked about entertainment stories online. Not because voices had been raised. Not because someone had stormed off stage. Not because anyone had humiliated another person. But because millions of people had watched two individuals navigate disagreement with confidence, composure, and respect. Perhaps that was the biggest surprise of all. In an era where conflict often seemed louder than conversation, this fictional exchange reminded viewers that calm words could leave the deepest impact. Long after the studio lights dimmed and the cameras stopped recording, one message continued to echo through countless discussions. The strongest voice in the room isn't always the loudest one. Sometimes it's the one willing to listen before speaking. And perhaps that's why people kept replaying the interview. Not searching for the moment someone lost control, but searching for the moment both sides chose understanding over outrage. If this story kept you hooked from beginning to end, let us know what you think. Whose perspective did you find more convincing, Margot Robbie's or Sunny Hostin's? Share your opinion in the comments below. ***. And don't forget to subscribe to Prime Spotlight, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next explosive, dramatic celebrity storytelling adventure. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.